Hear these words from John 13, 1 through 17, and 31 to 35. I'm going to read the scripture in my mother tongue, which is in Japanese. 杉越の祭りの前にイエスはこの世を去って父の身元に行くべき自分の時が来たことを知り、世にいる自分の者たちを愛して彼らを最後まで愛し通された。夕食の時、悪魔はすでにシモンの子イスカリオテのユダヤの心にイエスを裏切ろうとする思いを入れていたが、イエスは父がすべてのものを自分の手にお与えになったこと、また自分は神から出てきて神に帰ろうとしていることを思い、夕食の席から立ち上がって上着を脱ぎ、手ぬぐいを取って腰に巻き、それから水をたらいに入れて弟子たちの足を洗い、腰に巻いた手ぬぐいで拭き始められた。こうしてシモン・ペテロの番になった。すると彼はイエスに、主よ、あなたが私の足をお洗いになるのですかと言った。イエスは彼に答えて言われた。私のしていることは今あなたには分からないが、後で分かるようになるだろう。ペテロはイエスに言った。私の足を決して洗わないでください。イエスは彼に答えられた。もし私があなたの足を洗わないなら、あなたは私と何の関わりもなくなる。シモン・ペテロはイエスに言った。主よ、では足だけではなく、どうぞ手も頭も。イエスは彼に言われた。すでに体を洗った者は足の他は洗う必要がない。全身がきれいなのだから。あなた方はきれいなのだ。しかしみんながそうなのではない。イエスは自分を裏切る者を知っておられた。それでみんながきれいになるのではないと言われたのである。こうして彼らの足を洗ってから上着をつけ、再び席に戻って彼らに言われた。私があなた方にしたことがわかるか。あなた方は私を教師、また主と呼んでいる。そういうのは正しい。私はその通りである。しかし主であり、また教師である私があなた方の足を洗ったからには、あなた方もまた互いに足を洗うべきである。私があなた方にした通りにあなた方もするように、私は手本を示したのだ。よくよくあなた方に言っておく。僕はその主人に勝るものではなく、使わされたものは使わしたもとに勝るものではない。もしこれらのことが分かってそれを行うなら、あなた方は幸いである。31 to 35。さて彼が出ていくとイエスは言われた。今や人の子は栄光を受けた。神もまた彼によって栄光をお受けになった。彼によって栄光をお受けになったのなら、神ご自身も彼に栄光をお授けになるであろう。すぐにもお授けになるであろう。子たちよ、私はまだしばらくあなた方と一緒にいる。あなた方は私を探すだろうが、すでにユダヤ人たちに言った通り、今あなた方にも言う。あなた方は私の行くところに来ることはできない。私は新しい戒めをあなた方に与える。互いに愛し合いなさい。私があなた方を愛したように、あなた方も互いに愛しなさい。互いに愛し合うならば、それによってあなたが私の弟子であることをすべての者が認めるであろう。This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Shion. Well, friends, I know that the confession time is over, but I have one more to make. I embarrassingly recently, had to look up what the word Maundy means. Does anybody know what it means? Close. Anybody? That's cheating. That's not fair. Brian doesn't get to answer. I thought anybody behind me doesn't get to answer. Okay, it means it's a short version. Sorry, that was a little harsh. I love you, brother. It's a short version for the Latin word mandatum, And as you might be able to guess, that means mandate or command, right? Tonight, Maundy Thursday, then, is the night that we not just remember that Jesus washed his disciples' feet, the same night that he was betrayed. As John says, the same night that he knew his time was coming to an end. It's not just that we remember. We remember the commandment that Jesus gave after doing that. Here it is one more time. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. Remember, Jesus had just washed the disciples' feet, and then he says this, love like I've loved you. How is that? How has Jesus just loved? Here's how. Here's a couple ways to think about this. Jesus loved in a way that was scandalous, maybe odd, maybe just plain weird to anybody that would have been looking in from the outside. Maybe Jesus is commanding the disciples to love in a way that sets aside their reputation. Maybe to love in a way that even feels a little bit risky, that might cost you something. And Jesus is saying, love the unlovable. Love those that maybe around you no one else loves. Love those that are hard to see, hard to know. This is how I've loved you, Jesus says. Now you go do the same. Friends, I know from getting to be in a cluster with these folks, I know that this sort of love is happening in all of our contexts in unique ways. So what we want to do tonight, this night that we remember this mandate, this command that Jesus gave his disciples to love another, is we want to share with you some stories of the church loving people like that. Not to boast, not to brag, but to celebrate. To celebrate the expressions of the church, expressions of Jesus' love that we see all around us, and it's my hope maybe even to stir up your holy imagination. To stir up a holy imagination, to wonder how it is God might be calling you to lean into this command, to love as I've loved you. So I want to tell you about a Thursday night. It was a pretty normal Thursday night in Hospers. It was the third Thursday night of the month. If you're from Hospers, you know that means that's our food box ministry distribution night. This is where we get to serve our neighbors in multiple ways. This Thursday night in particular, we got to serve our neighbors not just by giving boxes of food, but also by engaging in conversation. Our volunteers served our neighbors by listening to them, by seeing them, and by praying for them. On this particular night, Jonathan, that's not his real name, but we'll call him Jonathan. Jonathan showed up on this Thursday night. Jonathan was a young man who has been in the community for a long, long time, and frankly has a long history in the community, and not always a positive history in the community. If you have lived in Hospers and know Jonathan, you might see Jonathan blocks away walking, and you might be tempted to go to a different block. This is how Jonathan experiences his community. But on this night, he showed up to the Hospers campus on a food box distribution night, not to get food, presumably to be seen, to be known, to talk to an adult, to have someone engage him in conversation. And the volunteers on that night did just that. They saw him, particularly one volunteer, we're going to call him Carl. That's also not his name, but Carl saw Jonathan in a way that's worth sharing. Carl is not from Northwest Iowa. Carl does not know Jonathan. Carl is not going to a different block, if you know what I mean, when he sees Jonathan. Instead, Carl goes out of his way and says, Jonathan, why don't you come on in? Why don't you come on in and let's talk? Why don't we talk a little bit, and then I'm going to pray with you. Jonathan was seen by Carl in a way that is maybe a little risky, maybe a little weird looking in from the outside. And here was Carl doing just that. Now, did Jonathan's life change in that night? I don't know, maybe not. I imagine Jonathan has a long road ahead of him and probably some harder things mixed in with some easier things. But here's what I do know, that in this moment, Carl loved Jonathan in the same way that Jesus loved his disciples. And friends, Jesus says, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."
This is a personal story. It's a warm spring afternoon. The warmth of the sun touches my face. I notice the tulip shoots reaching toward the sun. Voices of little children playing at the park just down the street float along the airwaves. I hear a euphony of birds calling out to one another, pleasing and settling my spirit. Everywhere, new life is budding. As I walk up to the door, I'm reminded of the lifeless environment that's in this apartment. Elizabeth, and again, this is not her real name, Elizabeth's children are not in her home, but the friend addiction is. She fights a host of emotions: anger, apprehension, suspicion, and fear, just to name a few. In fact, Elizabeth feels hopeless, and her friend soothes the feelings and quiets the hearts and the thoughts as she tries to heal from trauma. I've walked up to this door often, but today I approach with 3 additional people, because alcohol has become her weapon to end her life. She's been court-ordered to inpatient rehab. She's often resistant and combative to any offer for help, because she says, like many of us, I can do it on my own. She says she doesn't want to be away from her children for that long. As I open the door to the apartment, I don't want to startle her, so I call out, "Elizabeth, are you here? Are you awake?" I hear some sounds coming from her bedroom, so I walk in that direction, asking the deputies and my husband to remain in the living room. Elizabeth is lying on her bed, surrounded by her friends. I help her dress, telling her the reason that I'm here. I speak gently and quietly. Today, she trusts me. As we walk out of her bedroom, my husband meets her at the opening to the living room. Without a word, he opens his arms wide. And without hesitation, she walks right into his arms, and he envelops her in a hug expressing unconditional love, compassion, and care. And Jesus says, "By this, everyone will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."
Humble, selfless, and servant aren't often words that automatically come to my mind when I think of a junior high boy. I've been in youth ministry for more years than I want to claim, so the words I think of most often are wild, rambunctious, and smelly. But then there are those times when they can surprise you, like this past year with a young man that I will call Joe. So let me tell you more. Joe is a junior high student that attends my church, Bethel in Sheldon, and he comes faithfully to youth group on Wednesday nights. We always kick our youth group nights off by sharing a meal together. Sometimes it's pizza, subs, smoked pork. Really, I think we've had a little bit of everything this year, and nothing ever goes to waste. Joe has a huge heart, and after learning that sometimes our youth director paid with his own money to make sure there was a meal, led him to a long conversation with his mom about why we have dinner at youth group. His mom explained to him that some kids don't have the luxury of a hot meal at night. I'll just say we have some kids at our youth group that comes from hard places. I'm pretty sure this broke his heart. This conversation with his mom sparked a longing in Joe to do something to provide the needed meals. Joe then asked his mom if he could sell homemade cookies. Now let me tell you this, Joe is as comfortable in the kitchen as he is on the football field, and he's really, really good at football. Joe, this awesome junior high boy, chose to serve his peers well as he spent a whole weekend baking. And when all the cookies had sold, Joe raised $100. He didn't do this for pats on the back or to hear, "Good job, Joe." He saw a need and thought, how can I help? I like to think of him helping to provide the physical food for those kids so they could focus on the spiritual food of the lesson. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." So thank you, Joe, for your example. But the last thing this humble, selfless servant would ever want to do is draw attention to himself. And Jesus says, "By this, everyone will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."
I'm going to share how I've seen God at work at church, and I've also not used the individual's name. The sun is streaming through the bare windows of the historic building downtown. It's early, and I see him walking toward the building, shoulders slumped, hands in pockets. Jacob walks through the doors toward me. "Good morning, Jake," I say cheerfully. He can't hide a smile as we chat about his week. "I visited Grandpa and Grandma today," he continues, making me feel a part of his family. "And my aunt was there. It's so hard to be around her because, as you know, I'm a Trumper, and she's one of those Democrats." I smile and I said, "Oh, when you say Trumper, I'm so curious what that means to you." And we continue in our conversation. On August 28, 2022, was the first service of Maria Magdalena, and we met at the Fruited Plain Cafe in Sioux Center. The excitement of it all was overwhelming. And as we were setting up chairs, Christian says, "Hey guys," stopping us in the middle of setting up. "There's a guy out hanging outside and he's acting a little sus." One of our leadership team members goes outside and invites him in. Reluctantly, Jacob comes inside with the promise of fresh jalapeno bread waiting for him. He left swiftly as soon as people started arriving for our first service. The next week, as we were setting up chairs, there was Jacob again. And he came back this time and stayed for the first song, but he was scrolling his phone the entire time, disengaged. Week after week, Jacob came back to Maria Magdalena. Today, he's one of our most faithful participants at church. From not wanting to step foot inside a church to now asking for prayer requests and singing along to the worship music. He has come a long way in a year and a half. Last week, I asked Jake if I could share the impact he has had on my life at this service. And his smile stretched from ear to ear. He was honored. And I asked him, what could I say about what church has meant to him? And here's how he responded. I see you and Dan like a second family. I have been kicked out of churches before because of my past, but this church has broadened my horizon. And I said, what do you mean by that? He revealed to me that in high school he was bullied by Latinos. And he said, I hated Mexicans because of my experiences with them. And now I have you as my pastor. And I realized that that's not true about every individual that I've met. And so we were able to talk about the beauty of getting to see past difference, past hurt, past disagreement. And I remembered my conversation with him about him saying he was a Trumper. And such a phrase that could be so divisive. But both of us, instead of letting that divide us, we came together with curiosity about one another, about our experiences, and about how together we were experiencing the body of Christ through a Revelation 7:9 vision. And so Jesus says, by this, everyone will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another.
When I climb the stairs to the second floor, where the school cafeteria is, it's like a hornet's nest, humming with life. Kids are everywhere, sitting around tables, chatting and laughing, eating their lunches. And then I see him, Carlos. He's in the second grade. He's walking towards me. He's holding his lunch tray, a radiant smile on his face. Carlos, I shout above all the chatter. How are you, my friend? He shows me his lunch tray and says, it's chicken nuggets today. They're my favorite. I walk out of the cafeteria with him and around the corner to the room that's designated for Kids Hope USA. I'm one of about 16 Kids Hope mentors in our church that have been matched up with students in the MOC Floyd Valley Elementary School, and it's been awesome. We each meet our students one-on-one for an hour a week, all on different days. We're there for just our student to help them feel seen and loved and valued. My days with Carlos are Thursdays at 11:15 a.m. It is honestly one of my favorite times of the week. I imagine my prayer partner, Harriet Cruzy, who's here tonight, sitting in her rocking chair in the Landsmere retirement community, praying for both Carlos and me as we meet together. Carlos and I sit down at the little table in the room. He opens his milk carton and he digs into his chicken nuggets, and we talk. I love this kid. He tells me about how his day is going and how he's going to his dad's house this weekend, and they're going to go to the Tsunami Water Park in Sioux Center. He can't wait. Carlos really loves his dad, and he really loves his mom too. And then he tells me that he's been feeling sad lately because his mom and dad aren't together. They got a divorce, he says quietly, looking down at his chicken nuggets. I lean in. You know what, Carlos? I say. My parents are divorced too. You and me, we're a lot alike. He looks up. Really? He asks. I nod. And then he smiles. And we talk some more about flag football and his favorite video games and Star Wars, which we both love. Then we play Legos, and Carlos continues to open his heart to me. Did I tell you that I love this kid? I love this kid. Before we know it, it's 12:05. The time goes so fast, and I walk Carlos back to the cafeteria to drop off his tray, and then we go downstairs to his classroom. I give Carlos a high five, and I tell him that I'll see him next week. His teacher, Mrs. Mason, gets up from her desk and walks over to me. She says, Brian, he was so excited to see you today. This morning when he came to school, he said to me, Mrs. Mason, do you know what today is? It's Thursday, and you know what that means. And I said to him, what does that mean, Carlos? And he gave a big smile and said, it means my buddy is coming to see me today. I thank God for Melinda Netton, our Kids Hope USA director, and these marvelous kids that we get to build relationships with, and the opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus in our public elementary school. And Jesus says, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Friends, it's true. The defining mark of mature Christian discipleship is this love for one another and our love for all of our neighbors, as Christ has loved us and loves us still. So it's at this table, the Lord's Supper, where we get to experience tonight God's radical love for us. And it's at this table where together, not only do we experience this love for us, but we in turn are called to share this love with a world that so desperately needs it. Let's gather around the table together.